Greetings, everyone. First of all, welcome Satyarth, Nayak, and Mona Verma. It's an honor and delight to be sharing the stage with you today and to be interacting with you on a very intriguing and interesting topic, Tales from the Puranas. The divine essence with infinite potential, the ultimate truth that there was nothing in the beginning and there will be nothing in the end. And everything in between is the stories and the tales and the chronicles that we hear from the Puranas and Vedas and the sacred scripts and scriptures. And we have two experts with us here who will be taking the discussion forward. So my very first question to Satyarth. Satyarth, you have been an expert in the genre, this historical fiction and mythology, both script writing and authoring so many books. And your latest book, which is a national bestseller, best wishes for that and congratulations for that. So, having spent so much time in this genre, what do you think, what is the impact of this particular genre through literature or screenwriting in the lives of people of all ages in the current times? How impactful it is?
Right. Um, Hello, everyone. I think it's a bit of a complex question. I mean, mytho, of course, has always been a huge influence in our lives. I think we Indians have grown up with amazing mythology. We have had such great writing in our ancient texts, with the Vedas, Upanishads, Purans. So we have a very emotional attachment to these texts anyways. And I think like so many of you here, I'm sure you'll identify with the fact that I grew up reading and hearing these stories from my elders in the family. And for me, my grandfather was a huge influence. I remember sitting on his lap and just absorbing these stories. It was almost a wonderful process of osmosis, just putting it up. That's how the book even happened, me wanting to explore it further. Okay, are there any other stories that one is not aware of? So when I entered the world of the Puranas, it was a staggering universe to enter, and imagine just to be in that world and to find the kind of writing that has happened. So the impact, of course, then is that it inspires you. I think mytho for me, it calls out to the inner child in all of us, because, and yet at the same time, the inspiration is to be a better adult. So somewhere it kind of serves both the purposes. So while that impact is extremely positive, mytho, along with religion, can of course become, it can also be taken in a more serious note sometimes. It can be seen as, like I said, people are so attached to something of that sort. Like today I know when I'm writing Mahagatha, and even if there are certain aspects of a story that are there in the Puranas, today I will not put that in my book. I will probably be somewhere, I will be self-censoring myself because I know today the climate is not conducive to, like for example, there's a story where when Vishnu takes the form of Mohini, and he's in the most ravishing female avatar, the Puranas tell me that Shiva was so filled with lust that Shiva and Vishnu, they actually cohabited, they copulated. And from them was born, from Shiva and Mohini was born God Ayappa, who is a huge deity down south. But I don't put that in my book because I wonder if what the reaction would be. I wonder how people today will take to the fact that, so what you will find in my book is a very chaste embrace. So I think somewhere, while I said like mytho inspires you, once makes you cherish your childhood, wants you to be a better adult, at the same time it does, we are in a situation today where mytho has to be, you have to tread it lightly when it comes to mytho. And because, like I said, it is an emotional response that many people have. And today's, we are, as a nation, a lot more hypersensitive about mythology and our gods. So I think, so it's interesting, it's a tricky time to be a mytho writer, but that's the fun of it, I guess.
That's very perfectly said, and there's so much to learn from it. So thank you. Mona, that brings me to my query. You being a haiku poet, a limericks poet, and having authored books in self-help and different genres, what brings you to mythology and historical fiction?
Thank you for that question, Jyoti. Actually, I was not prepared for it. It was only during the COVID times that my publisher, he called me up one day and he said, let's do the Puranas together. I said, who's the together? He said, you do it for us. So I said, are you kidding me? It's like, where do you, the research comes, so much of research it entails. And then these are Shrutis and Smritis that is so difficult to get the right thing, the right name, the right flavor, and the right story. You will agree, Satyarth. So I said, no, no, I'm not dipping my fingers into this. I'm not doing this. But he kept chasing me, said, no, no, you've just done Banaras and the others, and you've been writing history with an element of mythology in it. You can do it, you can do it. And he really barraged me with those. He forced me to do it, literally. Then I told him, okay, you got to give me time. I'll take 6 months. I'll do my research. It's only if I find something which holds some sense and volume, will I go ahead with it. Otherwise, I might drop the project. So during the COVID times, I guess we had ample time. We were literally unemployed. We had ample time to do that kind of research. So I got in papers from Banaras Hindu University, Kanchi Kalkoti Peetham, from the Ashtadash Puranas. I started reading them. And lo and behold, I had so much data and such interesting stories, and I was wondering, why do our children read the Harry Potter? All that happens in Harry Potter is happening in our Mahapuranas. So came out these 24 stories after extensive research, and I totally agree with Satyarth. There were so many things which came across as a hard pass. I really needed to chuck them away, because when your characters have a religious standing, there is a no-go territory, which we really need to respect and keep ourselves protected, as I would say it in very mild manner. And then this book came about, and I was myself so taken up by the stories that I felt that the world must read, the younger people must read these stories, and they need to understand that our traditions, our storytelling, our Puranas, our Vedas, they are ancient but they are not obsolete. ये प्राचीन है, जर्जर नहीं है हमारी संस्कृति. And there are very interesting stories. And thus the Deve Sutras came up. And this book was written with my daughter Sanjana, who was at home during that time, and she couldn't go to the UK for work because of obvious reasons. And we both worked together on this book, which working with her had an added benefit, which was that I could pass it through that contemporary lens of Generation Z, where she would tell me, no, Mom, this is way too preposterous. This will not work. Oh, yeah. To the stories that she said, oh, wow. Those were the ones that went into it.
Wonderful and very interesting and inspiring as well.
Thank you.
So probably people should just start those genres, exploring those genres, because that's quite inspiring. And Satyarth, I would like to ask you, although in your the very first statements that you made, you have made it quite clear, but still, why the lesser known stories from the Puranas?
No, I think for obvious reasons. I mean, one, of course, like I said, one has grown up with so many, you're hearing so many popular stories. So for me, the magic was to come across a story that was unknown and to find that the amount of wisdom that even that contained. So like one of the, like she spoke that she had a live filter who was there with her. For me, there was also a three-pronged criteria, and one of them was if a story was lesser known and it deserved a wider audience. Because just the kind of character or the kind of wisdom that it had to come out. Like there's a very small story that's there in Mahagatha, which was there in the Puranas, that I came across for the very first time, and that has today become one of the most loved stories. When I meet readers, they always talk about Swaha. Now, not many people would know about a lady called Swaha in the Puranas. So the story goes that one day all the gods come to Brahma and say, we are famished, we have nothing to eat. And Brahma says, how is that possible? I have made a very efficient system where when humans on earth, when they make offerings in the yajna, whatever is offered to the fire, Agni is supposed to transfer that to heaven, and that is your food. So I have a very proper system in place. How come you're all famished? And Agni comes and folds his hands and says, I don't seem to have the agency. I just lack the agency to be able to make that transfer. And then Brahma scratches his foreheads to find an answer and finds nothing. And that's when Brahma approaches Prakriti, Mother Nature, that what do we do? How do we solve this problem? And Prakriti creates a female goddess. And Brahma says, from now on, you will be the conduit. You will make the transfer possible. And Brahma says, what has Prakriti named you? And she says, Swaha. So Brahma says, from now on, whenever there is a yajna on earth, every line, every mantra must end with the word Swaha, which is what we have been hearing, I'm sure, at every yajna. He says, unless the word Swaha is chanted, the food will not make it to the heaven. And ultimately, Agni and Swaha marry, and they are forever united. Yeah. So what a lovely story. And just to see, first of all, the way the Puranas celebrate women. You know, the fact that the woman has always been a nourishing agent, a nurturing agent in the Puranas. I mean, imagine these hyper-masculine gods standing completely helpless. It's a matter of survival, and who comes to their aid? A woman. So that is the darja that women have in the Puranas. So those kind of stories had to be put out. I mean, imagine there are stories about the LGBTQ in the Puranas.
Yes.
So today, when you think about, we see them as a separate section. The Puranas embrace them, and there are stories of Buddha and Ela, you know, where they represent that community as well. Or stories of Sangya and Tara. These are women who leave their husbands because they're not sexually satisfied. The Puranas don't judge the women. It is the men who come and say, "We are sorry. We should have known better." So those stories had to come out. So again, like just to hark back, the kind of wisdom in the Puranas is staggering, and it's important that today's generation knows that this is not just about gods and goddesses and rituals and puja. Wo sab bhi hai, but Puranas is infinitely about wisdom. And another very striking thing about Puranas is it's a completely grey zone. The characters are grey. There's no good and there's no good and bad, black and white. I mean, we talk about 50 shades of grey. The Puranas have like 5 million shades of grey if you read them. So, which is why they're so contemporary. Which is why these stories will resonate with you, because it's about us. It's about gods with human characteristics. Indra is jealous all the time that koi mera throne na le le mujhse. Shiva, Brahma lusts after his own daughter. Things like that. So negative, ye sara gods mein hai. And the basic difference why this is there in the Puranas also is because if you see the difference between Vedas and Purans, Vedas have all the teachings. Those teachings were imparted to the common man through the Purans, through the form of stories. So which is why these can also be seen as metaphorical stories to impart a particular wisdom. So all of that is what makes it fascinating.
Thank you. And that can only come from, yes?
Very well, sir.
Yes, yes, and that can only come from an expert, and that was very insightful. And as you just said, so many things about, yes, I would just like to add, even the science and technology that we speak of today, and if we look back into our sacred texts, we find that, yes, maybe those were the things that already existed then, and we have been interpreting them, and with however we are evolving each day and every moment. So thank you so much. And coming back to you, Mona. Mona, how do you inculcate and incorporate the teachings of these sacred texts into your profession, that is of organizational coaching?
Very interesting question. Okay, so in organizational coaching, right, so there is an Abelin's paradox, there's a reverse delegation, there is this and there is that, and all that stuff. So all these come across as the management jargons. But when you read the Puranas or you read the Mahabharata, for them, the characters in these scriptures, it was like an everyday story that they were doing a reverse delegation or, deploying a Eisenhower matrix in their lives. So when I was researching on the Puranas, this idea struck me that why not pick up something from our scriptures and use it in conjunction with the management mantra and throw that to people. And the way it was lapped up, for example, the Rahim's Dohas, right? So Rahim and प्रीति ना कीजिए जस किरण ने की ऊपर से सो दिल मिला भीतर भागे तीन. Right, so it's an example of teamwork. मुंड मुंडाए हरी मिले हर कोई ले मुंडाए बाल बाल के मुंडते भेड़ न बैकुंठ जाए. So it is a fine example on herd mentality. For Hanumanji to go and fetch the Sanjeevani booty is a very fine example of the Eisenhower matrix. What is urgent, what is important, what should be dumped, what should be delegated, and what should be planned for. He did not go around the entire Dronagiri Parbat looking for the Sanjeevani booty. In fact, he waited for Rishi, he took the entire Parbat with him and brought it to Rishi Susheshan. He said, you do it. So something that needed to be delegated, something which was urgent at one point was done immediately, something which was important was planned, and stuff like that. So all these examples fit very well with our Indian community as well as for the multinationals I work with, because the Ramayana and the Mahabharata is an epic which is favored by everybody across the globe. It is not something which is confined to Indian understanding alone. So they lapped it up, and the best thing was that when you speak from your scriptures, for most of the people, it is like watering their roots. They go back to their childhood, the kind of stories they were told, as Satyarth very nicely he put it, that it forms the social backcloth of our society. And because when we hear those stories as we grow up, and you are suddenly given to understand at the age of 30 or 40 that the raw absorbing stories that you heard as a kid have a very valid statement to make and have a managerial relevance in today's time. It strikes a chord. It does.
That's so well put, Mona. And there's so much to learn from there that in every walk and phase of life, how we can inculcate that. And those dohas were wonderful, music to ears. So that's wonderful. So thank you. And Satyarth, coming back to you, in your stories, through your stories, you depict the importance of sound of Om and also the Panch Tattvas, the three devs, if you can, yeah, correct me. So, how do you trace them back to the creation, and how do you bring it alive through your stories? So, if you can.
No, that was just the first story. The first story, which is Mahagatha is written in a chronological format. The idea was when I started reading the Puranas, it was again what was fascinating was that the stories, I mean, many of the stories that we know them as standalone tales, you know. But when you read the Puranas, you realize that everything is connected to each other. Everything has a past and present and a future. So nothing is standalone. I mean, again, to give you a small example, we have all heard of the story of Devki and Kans, you know, how Kans killed the 6 sons of Devki. Now that happened in Dwapar Yuga, but isse pehle in Sat Yuga, there were 2 sisters called Aditi and Diti. Aditi's sons were the Adityas, and Indra was the eldest Aditya, so they were the gods. And Diti's sons were the Daityas, who were the demons. And the gods and demons always used to fight, and Daityas would die a lot more than the Adityas. So Diti got very angry with Indra, and she asks for a boon from her husband Kashyap, that I want to kill Indra, give me a son. Kashyap says you can have a son if you do penance for 10,000 years. And in the 10,000 years, you should observe every rite of cleanliness. Diti says, I will do anything that it takes to kill Indra. And as she goes and she starts that penance, Indra comes and starts observing because he's terrified that, you know, the person in the womb is about to kill me 10,000 years later. So he keeps observing every day, hoping Diti will make some mistake or the other. She doesn't. Now only 3 days are remaining, and Indra is like, ab to मामला खत्म होने वाला है. On the last day, because Diti's pregnancy is now full term and she is a lot more prone to fatigue, on the last day, Diti forgets to wash her feet and she sleeps. So her body instantly becomes vulnerable. So she loses that armor of magic that had been there. Indra immediately enters her womb and destroys the fetus. So all the effort has gone to waste. So when Diti realizes that, she curses not Indra but her sister Aditi, that you were also a mother, but you made your son kill my unborn child. So I curse you that there will be a time when you will see your sons dying before your eyes one by one, and you won't be able to stop that. So Aditi is reborn as Devki in Dwapar Yuga. So the fact that everything in the Puranas has a past and a present, ultimately it's all a karmic cycle, you know. So for me that was important. So to realize that, which is why so I thought the best way would be to go chronologically. So I first take you to Sat Yuga, the stories that you have there. Then how do those stories, then how are they connected to the next, to Treta, then to Dwapar, and finally Kali. So that connection was important, which is why the book begins with creation, like you said, which talks about the importance of Om, the coming of the 3 devs, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, and how the Panchatattva was created. So once the universe is created, then like Vishnu says, he tells Narad, the world is ready, bahut maya hone wali hai. There's a lot of maya about to happen, and once maya takes over, it is about these stories and events, ek ke baad ek, and everything has a past and a present, connected karmically. So what you find here is a chronological journey of the entire universe, which is what was fascinating for me.
Yes. And
Sorry. Can I? Yeah, because most of these stories in the Puranas are also the backstories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Look at Shikhandi, the curse of Paris on Sita. So all those things, you know, when we are reading the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, we try to read those scriptures, you know, in isolation, as if they were like insulated scriptures. But no, all these, there are these, like, it's like a spinal cord, the Puranas, and all the nerves are reaching out. So there's a Shikhandi, there is a Shok Sundari, there's a curse of parrots on Sita, and Nirjala Ekadashi, all those things which form the basis of the backstories of Mahabharata and Ramayana, which is great. which was a discovery when we were, I guess,
Exactly.
researching on the books.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, and that's quite fascinating, and I think it is very inspiring for the generations to follow because coming from two experts, yes, and you have made it so interesting. And I would like to add that, yes, as you had mentioned earlier, Harry Potter, why do we have to look to the West when we have the best in our own sacred texts? So that's wonderful. And Mona, I would like to continue with that thought, and I would like to ask you, what is the importance of retelling all these stories? Because we know the sacred texts are certainly very different than and the retellings. So, what is the importance of it in today's times and in the generations?
Yes, wonderful question, Jyoti. You know what? Most of the time, people or parents generally complain that children don't read. And worse still, they will say the children are certainly not interested in the scriptures. But why weren't they, interested in the scriptures when they are reading, stories from the Bible? They are reading the Harry Potter, which also comes up, conjures the same kind of magic, plants speaking to each other, or some magic conjuring up somewhere with in a bottle or in a pot. Same thing is there, but why aren't they reading? Maybe the writings were not interesting enough to get people interested. They were way too didactic. The vocabulary was way too stiff and stern. And how would young people pick up a book like that and read, which is this thicker book and which has maybe all Sanskrit shlokas and which are, with due respect to them, which are very vital for that particular book, but not for the understanding of a 12-year-old or for a 14-year-old, maybe for older people, but not them. So maybe we needed to import the product again, but in a new packaging. And this is, I guess, both of us have tried to do with this particular book. So because they were didactic, they were not being consumed by the Generation Z. So we rebottled it, we rewrapped it, although never without diluting the main content, the mainstay of the story. It is same. The language is dealt with differently, and with the glossary and with some backstories, and with in my book I have made snake, a lotus, a fish, and a bird or a parrot, which are basically very vital to most of the stories from the Puranas. They feature somewhere or the other as very pivotal characters in in my book. So the retelling is also very important for the young people to understand. Who will tell them those stories once that generation who was telling the stories, are nana nani dada dadis, are no more? So once that generation of the baby boomers is gone, these stories also vanish with them. That is why it is very important for us to pass on those stories, the ones that we read from the scriptures and also the ones that we heard from our people, and then sort of settle the dichotomy between them, because there are lots of doubts, there are lots of questions, names feature differently. Sometimes even the names of the animals or the birds, Tarakshi for that matter, the name of the four baby birds are different in most of the scriptures. So, I had to go to Pingashka. So there was a name called Pingashka in there. So, and one said it is Pingaka. So I said, what is Pingaka? One says it's Pingashka, so which is the right word? Then there was one more word, and then one more word. Then there's lots of iconography. Like, for example, like Kaliya Nag. So why Kaliya Nag was called Kaliya Nag? Because he was a Kala Nag. And it also depicted his character according to this thing. Or Krishna was called Krishna because of his dusky complexion. So there's lots of this iconography and, symbolism. So I sort of, I went and I researched on the word Pingashka. It means the yellow-eyed one. And birds have yellow eyes. That is how I settled that Pingashka is the right word, because it is the name of the bird that Rishi Jamini goes to fetch the answers from for the vexed questions on the Mahabharata. So, when all these things are given out to the readers, and you explain to them why something exists, why do we worship like that, what is the reason, whether it also has a scientific bearing or not, why the Somnath temple exists, why there are 27 constellations, what relationship they have with moon and Rohini and all that stuff. So then suddenly their interest, is it's peaked again. So this is how it goes. So I thought retelling was very important.
Also, I agree what she talks about the format, because if you remember our generation, we never read the Purans, but we were reading the Amar Chitra Katha, because they were putting those stories out in that amazing format that was so wonderful to see and read, you know.
Yeah.
So formatting, like she said, is very, very important, and hopefully, like, we have put out something that is friendly to to the generation.
Yeah.
In fact, I had Ayan Mukherjee releasing the book in Bombay, and he said, you know, Satyarth, what's great about Mahagatha is that I, who cannot read the Puranas, because that's a scary thought to enter any wish. He said, I'm not an academic. I can't go and read a Vishnu Puran or a Shiv Puran, but your book has given me an access to the Puranas. Through these stories, I can at least get some wisdom from
Right.
the like a distillation of what is there in the Purans. So I think that is, like she said, very important. Formatting, very, very important.
Yeah, I didn't want to write about them.
Yeah.
Leave apart expecting somebody to read about them.
Okay, that's very beautifully put. And if you're taking liberty on that wonderful thought, as you said, formatting, the importance of it in today's time. So, taking liberty and going ahead with that, I would like to ask both of you, you can share your thoughts on how far do you go with changing the language to fit into the understanding of today's generations. Because as you said, both of you mentioned that the language that we have in our ancient times are like going away, and the generations are moving ahead. Language is changing.
That again is something that one has to navigate. See, I mean, when I was writing Mahagatha, like I said, the language of the Puranas, there is a certain richness to it. There's a certain sublimity to it. So while I would, of course, want to, you know, respect that and give the certain kind of reverence it needs and put it out with that kind of respect, at the same time, I will also make sure that it's still easy language, simpler, that can be accessed by anyone who wants to read the book. So you have to strike that balance. You cannot lose the actual flavor of the Puranas. There is a certain purity, there is a certain divinity about, you know, the writing, because this is about Mytho, and Mytho has a certain, you know, sublime character, like Milton talks about Paradise Lost, the sublimity of the language that needs to be kept intact, and yet you do not dilute it to the extent that you lose the flavor, but also make it palatable, something that can be accessed by people of any age across, because I think we're both targeting as wide an audience as possible. We're not looking at any specific age group, so you want everybody to access these stories, and there's no point putting out something if no one can access it, you know, so you need to do that as well. So it's a tricky thing, but not impossible to achieve.
Yeah, what's the point otherwise?
Yeah, exactly.
What are your thoughts on that? I know,
Ditto.
Okay.
Honestly, I mean,
Okay.
he said what really I wanted to say, that, you know, in case it's not palatable enough, what's the point of offering? I mean, are you writing for yourself or you're writing to sell a book? So it's not whether you're telling an idea or you are able to sell an idea. And of course, you have a publisher who needs to laugh his way to the bank. So if you write the way whatever you want to write, then there's an editor sitting to strangle you, and there's a publisher telling you who wants to keep the telemachine ringing, isn't it? So you need to write in a way that it needs to sell. But yes, of course, with due reverence, we cannot dilute the storyline. We cannot deal loosely with the characters, and we need to keep the basics same. Just build around it. Right. There are so many stories in Puranas which are barely 6 to 7 lines. So after reading the Ashdash Puranas, I was like, khatam ho gayi. 6 line mein khatam ho gaya. Now it is a very interesting story, and I want to use it because I have only 24 stories. So I wanted to use that story. Now you need to build around that story. It's like an epicenter of trouble, the worm in your head. And now you need to build around it, and you need to make 2,500 to 3,000 words out of those 6 lines. How do you do that? So if there are 4 pillars to writing, for example, if there is object, there is emotion, there is dialogues, and there is setting, and you are using any one thing, whether it is emotions or whether it is dialogues, to make your content more appealing, what is wrong? And this is what we are doing. We are adding more dialogues. एक इमोशन होते हैं, हम उसमें 36 चीज़ें लिख देते हैं, बिकॉज हमको उसको 2005 वर्ड्स में 500 वर्ड्स में करना है, लेकिन हम उसको कहीं पे डेन नहीं करते उसके लेवल को.
We need to check with the audience if there are questions now. So, any questions, audience? Yes, right here. Can you just pass him the mic? I also have a couple of questions for you guys. I was listening to both of you.
My question is, as you said that Purans are so relatable even today, why they are not so popular as compared to Mahabharata and Ramayana, first thing. And second question is, if one starts to read the Purans, what should be the chronology?
Why they're not popular, I think they have not been written enough about. See, there are so many texts available of Mahabharata and Ramayana. And epics always are very fascinating to read. Epics can be easily put together as a book. And that it has been done across the years. But Purans, like I said, there are 36 Purans. 18 Mahapurans, 18 Upapurans. So imagine the universe that one will have to enter and tread and dilute and distill to be able to put anything out of that. So it was always a daunting task to put anything out. What you have available mostly are English translations of the Sanskrit Purans, which, like I said, you have to be not very appealing for a normal reader. You would not want to enter because Puranas are not only about stories. That is a very small part of the Puranas. Puranas have cosmogony, creation, philosophy, rituals, origin of temples. So that is it's a universe of wisdom, and to navigate that would be very difficult for any reader, and that has never been done in the proper mainstream format. Now writers like me and her are trying to bring that to you in the best form possible, which makes it accessible, like I said, so that you can get a window into the Puranas. So that, I think, answers your question. Why not as popular as the epics? Epics were always, and not just in India, if you look at it, even in the West, an Odyssey or an Iliad has a lot more selling point than a Bible would by any day, because mytho is difficult to navigate that ways as well.
And secondly, just because we haven't heard a particular story does not mean that a story does not exist. The thing is that the Mahabharata and the Ramayana were part of every household and part of the evening storytelling ritual, but not very many Puranas. Also, in particular, I feel one thing, that most of the time when we would ask questions to our elders why something like this would happen, at least my grandfather would say, ऐसे नहीं सवाल करते, भगवान के बारे में पूछते नहीं हैं, ऐसे ही था. Now the thing is, if somebody is not able to satiate my curiosity, not answer my question, I'm not interested. For me, it is preposterous. So if somebody were to tell me that this is the reason that something like this happens, this is the way we have a kalava, this is why a bindi is put right here, I would at least start relating to it. I would at least believe in the reason behind it. Whether I follow it or I don't follow it, that's another story. But nobody answered our questions. And the Puranas are very complex. So the questions needed to be answered. Whereas comparatively, the Mahabharata and Ramayana were at least linear storytelling. And that is why they were more popular. And I guess that's also one of the reasons that Puranas were slunk off in the shadows.
Also, I might be completely wrong, but I think interest in Mahabharata Ramayana happened post-80s with Ramanand Sagar's Ramayana and B.R. Chopra's Mahabharata. You saw those stories playing out on your screens, and that is when more people wanted to know more about them, and the whole cottage industry began around those two epics, That has never happened for the Puranas as well. So like she said, it's such a complex world to navigate. So hopefully now things will change.
So if sorry.
Yeah. And as you said that Ramanand Sagar's the story in itself is so complete, one never feels to go. Yeah. And the second question, how one can start reading Puran? What can be the starting point? There
is no such order that you need to follow. You can pick up any Puran that fascinates you, because remember, every Puran has a different take on the universe. So there is no chronology in the Puranas themselves. Every Puran is complete in itself. It begins with creation and talks about everything else. So you can pick up any Puran that piques your curiosity. But I would suggest that don't stop at one. If you loved one, keep reading as much as you can, because there's a wealth of wisdom to be earned.
Which is your favorite? Which is your favorite?
My favorite, I think, Bhagavad.
Oh, Bhagavad. Oh, yeah, because no reference of Radha Rani in the whole thing.
Yeah,
told by Shukdev to Parikshit.
And Ling Puran. So,
yes.
I am pleasing both the Vaishnavites and the Shaivites here.
Yes.
And I was going to add, why don't you just start by reading their book, and that will kind of give you that direction to which Puranas you would like. I mean, that's what I was thinking when I was listening to them. Any more questions from the audience? May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
This is for both of you, that while you were going through this entire process of researching and transcribing and writing, did it change you? And if it changed you, how?
I guess, ma'am, a better understanding of the stories was there, the backstories. Like, for example, when my grandfather would tell me the stories of Suryadev and the others, and he would mention the Somnath temple, but not in its entirety. So when I read the Puranas, I knew the entire storyline, the entire backstory of why a certain monument, a certain temple exists. So it helped me understand my culture better. also, all those gods, the gods, the Trinity, all those gods became very relatable. Look at the Lokpalas, always an issue. Always an issue, something or the other. They were so human-like, the Lokpalas. And the gods also themselves. The elements of ego, the element of jealousy, love, lust, hatred, everything was there as well. So when a character becomes relatable, it is easier to understand. Instead of putting them on a pedestal and just worshipping them.
Yes, we have one last 3 minutes. Oh, yes, absolutely. Sorry, Satyarth, you can answer.
I'm sorry,
later.
I did not attend your session, so whatever I'm asking could be out of context, absolutely. But because I could listen to last few sentences of you, and I was attending other sessions on similar topics. And this question, and this is not exactly about all Puranas, I want to specifically talk about mythology, that is Ramayana, Mahabharata. In Ramayana, what we see, Dasharath had 3 wives, and having polygamy, as we call it, was common there. And I'm talking, I don't know how many children, but they're children, and when I was a child, we understand Dasharath had 3 wives, Kaushalya, Sumitra, Kaikeyi, and all those things. Then we hear that Gandhari was there, she had 100 sons. So polygamy is acceptable because we even today see polygamy happening. There are legal wives of people living together in houses, maybe not in urban areas, but definitely in rural areas. But then we jump directly to Mahabharata and it automatically changes to polyandry. Kunti has 5 sons or 6 sons from 6 different people. They may not be people, they may be gods. Draupadi has 5 husbands. We accept that. We want, as child also, we are expected to accept that, not to ask any question, as you said. How do we, and somebody having 100 children, how do we relate it to today's living? Because relating to a character is emotions is easier, but relating to these physical happenings, how do we relate?
You mean in terms of very Victorian thoughts
Whatever,
which are happening
whatever.
right now? And
Even today, a woman marrying 2 men is impossible. Officially. Unofficially, things happen. We all know. Officially, you cannot marry 2 men. But a man definitely marries many women even today.
Yes.
So how do we relate to that? I don't know whether it is of context or not. If you
Even Mahabharata also has polygamy. If you see, for example,
polygamy is always there.
yeah,
But
exactly.
polyandry comes and
for
goes.
no,
It
but
comes
but
and goes.
again,
Yeah.
polyandry was not. Did not happen for the first time in the Mahabharata. Again, if you read the Puranas, you'll realize there was a story of a lady who had 10 husbands. Her name is Marisha. And Marisha married 10 men because when Marisha, I mean, there's a long story, it'll take up a lot of your time, but ultimately she's made to marry the 10 men, and from Marisha comes Daksha, who is the Prajapati Daksh from whom the entire world, all the beings have descended. So in a way, we are all products of, polyandry in a huge way. So polyandry is less popular, yes, but it has always been there, even in the Puranas as well. So not a completely new thought in the Mahabharata. But yes, like morality keeps changing across yugas and across avatars. And even, the Ramayana happens in Treta Yuga and Mahabharata happens in Dwapar Yuga. And within one yuga, you can see how much the morals change. I mean, even if you see the way Vishnu takes avatar, when he takes avatar as Ram in Treta Yuga, Vishnu Ram is the upholder. Every rule, every law has to be upheld. Nothing can be questioned. But the same Vishnu, when he comes as Krishna in the Dwapar Yuga, he is the uprooter, where everything can be uprooted, everything can be questioned in a million ways. So even gods adjust themselves as per the yugas and the values. Like in the Ramayana, the enemy is someone who's then an outsider. You come to Mahabharata, your enemies are right inside your own house. And today they say your enemies are right inside yourself.
Yeah.
So the way we keep evolving, values change, moralities change, practices change. So it is ultimately about that.
And
just
no
a very
literature exists
short answer.
Literature does not exist in vacuum. It never exists in vacuum. So very rightly, as Satyarth put it, that there are so many compounding factors when a certain story comes up, and who writes a story, why they write a story, stories also change with the storytellers, right? So all those things come into play. And also look at Chandradev with 27 wives. And that's why we have the constellations. So across the ages, this thing has existed. And our stories have always spoken about polygamy. All our epics have spoken about polygamy. It's only after the advent of the British in our country that, there were taboos, and then there were very prudish approach to so many things.